A humble mechanic's selfless act turned a Hollywood star's life upside down. On a treacherous winter night, amidst a relentless snowstorm, Ethan Cooper, a struggling mechanic in a quiet Colorado town, made a choice that would forever alter his destiny. Parked dangerously close to a steep drop, a luxury car lay half buried in snow. Inside, Ethan discovered an unconscious man, none other than Keanu Reeves, clutching onto a briefcase that seemed to hold secrets capable of shaking Hollywood to its core. With rough, calloused hands, but a heart full of warmth, Ethan braved not only the fury of nature, but also unseen perils that would test his courage. What truths lay behind the famous actor's perilous journey? And would Ethan's generosity be the spark that changed everything? Dive into this gripping story of sacrifice and bravery and discover how one kind gesture has the power to rewrite lives. In a small mountain town tucked within the Rockies, where snowstorms are as common as morning coffee, lived Ethan Cooper. At 29, Ethan didn't have much. His possessions included a worn-out repair shop, skilled hands, and a spirit always ready to lend help to anyone in need. His life had been anything but easy. Poverty shaped his childhood, and he'd lost his father when he was just a boy. Now, Ethan devoted himself to caring for his mother, Margaret, a frail but cheerful woman whose smile never faltered, even when the winter cold made her arthritis unbearable. Each day, Ethan toiled endlessly to keep his little shop afloat, though the mounting bills never seemed to take a break. This winter, however, the town bustled with new life. A recently opened ski resort high up in the mountains was drawing in wealthy visitors from across the country. For the townsfolk, it was an exciting change. For Ethan, it meant exhausting nights fixing high-end vehicles for the out-of-town elite. One such evening, as snow clouds gathered ominously, Ethan had just finished repairing an old pickup truck when the phone rang. A desperate call from the resort. The only snowplow capable of clearing the mountain roads was broken, and they needed Ethan immediately. Bundling up to face the storm, he was stopped by his mother, who stood shivering in the doorway, wrapped in an old wool shawl. "Ethan, do you hear that wind? The storm's unforgiving tonight," she said, her trembling hand resting on his shoulder. "Do you really have to go?" Ethan gave her a soft smile, determination flickering in his eyes. "Mom, I have to. They're counting on me. If that snowplow doesn't work, people could be stranded." He gently covered her frail hand with his own, the strength of his resolve evident. "I'll be careful. I promise." Margaret said no more, though her heart ached as she watched her son vanish into the storm. The door closed with a sharp creak, and the howling wind sent shivers down her spine. All she could do now was pray that her boy would return safely. Ethan's beat-up pickup rumbled down the icy mountain roads, tires crunching over frozen terrain as snow blanketed the world around him. The wind howled through the mountain canyons, its icy breath growing stronger with every passing mile. Snow fell in relentless waves, cloaking everything in white and reducing visibility to just a few feet. The bitter cold seeped through Ethan's heavy coat, but he kept going, his resolve as unyielding as the storm. Switching on the radio, he caught fragments of an ominous weather update, warnings of fierce winds and possible avalanches. Tightening his grip on the steering wheel, he muttered under his breath, "Just one more night." His focus locked ahead. He had no idea that this night would test him like never before. As the storm raged on, the wind screamed through the passes, battering Ethan's truck while waves of snow slammed against the windshield. The dim glow of his headlights barely pierced the dense darkness, swallowed by the icy night. Still, Ethan pressed forward, his determination unwavering. Suddenly, in the faint light ahead, he saw something. An SUV, its hazard lights flickering weakly, half buried in snow, near the edge of a steep drop. His chest tightened. "Someone needs help," he murmured, pulling over carefully on the slick, icy road. Stepping out, his boots crunched against the deep snow as the frigid wind whipped against his face, nearly blinding him. Shielding his eyes, Ethan pushed toward the stranded vehicle. Through the frosted window, he saw a figure slumped over the steering wheel, motionless. "She doesn't have much time," Ethan thought, his heart pounding. He grabbed the door handle and yanked with all his strength, but it wouldn't budge. It was frozen solid. Without hesitation, he ran back to his truck, grabbed a wrench, and shattered the window with a sharp swing. Glass shards scattered onto the snow like tiny crystals. "Sir, can you hear me?" Ethan shouted, his voice barely rising above the howling wind. No response. Ethan unlocked the door from the inside and carefully pulled the figure out. His flashlight beam revealed the face of a man in his late 40s, Keanu Reeves. His skin was pale, and his lips had turned a worrying shade of blue. A dark scarf clung loosely around his neck, almost blending into the snow. "Hang on, you're going to be okay," Ethan murmured as he steadied the man in his arms, ensuring he didn't worsen any injuries. Just then, a loud, ominous rumble erupted behind them. Spinning around, Ethan saw the SUV sliding toward the edge. Acting on instinct, Ethan lunged forward, clutching Keanu tightly as they tumbled onto the snow just in time. The SUV plunged over the cliff, its metallic screech fading into the void below. Gasping for breath, Ethan rose and carried Keanu to the truck, wrapping his own coat around him to keep him warm. Fumbling for his phone, Ethan cursed under his breath. "Dead battery," he muttered, his hands trembling from the freezing air. With no other choice, he jumped into the driver's seat, started the engine, and turned back toward town, silently praying he could get Keanu to the hospital in time. The return trip was nothing short of a nightmare. The wind slammed against the truck, shaking it violently like a boat in a storm. Every stretch of road became more treacherous, the tires slipping on patches of ice that threatened to send them spiraling out of control. Ethan glanced in the rearview mirror. Keanu was unconscious, his breath shallow and faint. Gritting his teeth, Ethan tightened his grip on the wheel. "Just make it to the hospital. Just keep him alive," he whispered, each word a desperate plea. Finally, through the blinding storm, the faint glow of the hospital's lights pierced the darkness, a beacon of hope in the endless night. Ethan hit the brakes, skidding to a stop outside the emergency room. Throwing open the door, he called out, "Help! He's been in an accident!" The emergency staff, bundled in thick coats, rushed out with a stretcher. Ethan stood back, watching as they carefully lifted Keanu from his truck and carried him inside. His chest felt heavy, the adrenaline still coursing through him, but for the first time that night, he allowed himself a sliver of relief. Keanu's chest felt tight, his heart pounding with unease as he trailed behind them to the entrance. Just as he stepped inside, the hospital lights flickered briefly before plunging everything into an oppressive darkness. The once bustling hallway now felt hauntingly silent, save for the faint cries of patients and the hurried shuffle of feet on the cold floor. Outside, the storm roared mercilessly, but inside, the eerie stillness was almost suffocating. Keanu froze in the emergency room doorway, his breath visible in the icy air. The faint beams of handheld flashlights sliced through the shadows as frantic nurses and doctors scrambled to adapt to the chaos. "What's going on?" Keanu called out, his voice carrying over the distant howl of the storm. A security guard rushed past, his face pale and slick with sweat. "The storm took out the main power line," the guard said, breathless. "And the hospital's generator? It broke down last week. We haven't been able to fix it." Keanu's stomach sank. His fists tightened as his eyes darted toward the room where the woman had been taken. The flickering beams of flashlights on the walls seemed to mirror the frantic rhythm of his racing thoughts. This night, he realized, was far from over. His pulse quickened as his gaze fixed on the room where the surgeons were preparing. A nurse's flashlight cast shaky shadows on the walls. Moments later, a doctor burst out, his forehead glistening with sweat despite the frigid air. "She needs surgery now," the doctor barked urgently. "We need surgical lights and a ventilator, immediately. We can't wait any longer." The words struck Keanu like a jolt. He clenched his fists, a surge of responsibility overwhelming him. As he scanned the chaotic scene, his resolve hardened. Patients and staff alike were helpless in the dark. Keanu stepped forward, his voice steady. "Take me to the generator room. I'll fix it." The guard hesitated, doubt etched across his face. "Are you serious? It's been broken for a week. We don't even have all the parts to repair it." Keanu's eyes burned with determination. "I'm not standing here while people die in the dark. Take me there, now." Something in his voice stirred the guard, who finally nodded and led him through the freezing, pitch-black hallways. Their footsteps echoed eerily in the cramped corridors, mingling with distant cries and the storm's relentless howls. The generator room was a small, damp space, reeking of mildew and burnt metal. Keanu knelt by the machine, his frozen fingers trembling but resolute as he removed the rusted cover. Inside, he was greeted by a mess of charred wires and worn-out components, a grim testament to years of neglect. "This isn't just a minor issue," he muttered under his breath, but his resolve didn't falter. The guard held the flashlight steady, his eyes filled with worry. "Can you fix it? Everyone upstairs is counting on this." Keanu nodded, though he knew time wasn't on his side. He scavenged the room for usable parts, coming up with a few mismatched spares. After a moment of thought, he turned to the guard. "I need something from my truck. It might have what I need." Through the blinding snowstorm, they hurried to Keanu's vehicle. His hands, numb from the cold, moved with a mix of precision and urgency as he removed parts from the engine. Every second felt like a fight between hope and despair, but Keanu refused to quit. Back in the generator room, he worked tirelessly, rewiring circuits, replacing filters, and adjusting components with the skill of a seasoned mechanic and the determination of someone who refused to fail. Minutes dragged into what felt like hours, but finally Keanu straightened and turned to the guard. "Try it now." The guard hesitated, then pressed the start button. For a moment, there was only silence. Then the generator sputtered to life with a low hum, the machinery shaking off its dormancy. Light spilled into the room, spreading quickly throughout the hospital. Cheers erupted upstairs as the hallways lit up once more. Keanu stood, his hands smeared with grease and oil, a deep sense of relief washing over him. He glanced toward the operating room, where the surgical lights now blazed bright, illuminating the doctors working with renewed urgency. The guard clapped a hand on Keanu's shoulder, his voice thick with gratitude. "You didn't just save her, you saved this entire hospital." Keanu didn't respond immediately, his gaze fixed on the room where the woman was fighting for her life. Quietly, he whispered, "Now, it's up to them." As exhaustion overtook him, he slumped into a nearby chair, his head dropping into his hands. Yet even in his weariness, a flicker of fulfillment lit his heart. He had done everything he could. The guard placed a firm hand on Ethan's shoulder, his voice thick with gratitude. "You just saved this entire hospital, and him too." Ethan said nothing, his mind too overwhelmed to respond. He glanced down at his hands, the memory of pulling Keanu from the wrecked SUV flashing vividly in his mind. The sight of the actor's pale, unconscious face was etched deeply into his thoughts. A flicker of hope stirred within him. "It's up to them now," Ethan murmured, his voice low and weighed with emotion. Exhaustion finally caught up with him as he sank into a nearby chair in the hospital hallway, his head falling into his hands. Despite his fatigue, a quiet sense of accomplishment washed over him. But as the hospital lights flickered back to life, a lingering question gnawed at him. Who is this man, and why was he driving alone in such a dangerous storm? Ethan stayed seated, trying to process everything, yet the mystery surrounding Keanu refused to let go. And though the hospital was no longer cloaked in darkness, Ethan's curiosity only grew stronger. What could have driven him to take such a huge risk? Hours later, as Ethan drifted off into an uneasy sleep, hurried footsteps broke the silence. A middle-aged man entered the hallway, his heavy coat dusted with snow, and his face lined with exhaustion and worry. But his eyes burned with determination. "Are you Ethan Cooper?" he asked, his voice low yet filled with emotion. Ethan stirred awake, startled, and nodded. "I'm Mark, Keanu's manager," the man introduced himself, gripping Ethan's hand firmly. "I came straight from LA when I heard about the accident. I don't even know how to begin thanking you. You saved his life." Ethan hesitated, unsure how to respond. "I just did what I could. Is he going to be okay?" "The doctors say his condition is stable now," Mark said, his voice breaking slightly. "If you hadn't gotten him here in time, I don't even want to think about what could have happened. I owe you more than I could ever repay." As the two sat down, Mark began to share Keanu's story. The actor had been on his way to meet Mark at the mountain resort, carrying a film script he believed could change the lives of countless people in the industry. But behind the scenes, Keanu had been facing immense challenges, betrayal by close collaborators and the weight of public scrutiny. The bag in the SUV contained critical documents tied to the project. "I told him not to travel in this weather," Mark said, his voice thick with concern. "But you know him. Stubborn as ever." Ethan listened quietly, struck by the gravity of what had unfolded. He never imagined that saving a stranger could tie him to something so significant. The next day, Keanu regained consciousness. Though weak, he insisted on meeting Ethan. When Ethan entered the hospital room, Keanu greeted him with a faint but genuine smile. "You're Ethan, right? The guy who saved me from that storm?" he asked, his voice hoarse but sincere. Ethan nodded, feeling his face flush. "I just happened to be there. Anyone would have done the same." Keanu shook his head, his eyes filled with appreciation. "Not everyone would risk their life for a stranger, or fix a hospital generator to save others. You're remarkable, Ethan." Ethan offered a humble smile. "I wasn't thinking about much. I just wanted to help." As Ethan prepared to leave, Mark handed him an envelope. "This is just a small token of our gratitude," he said. "You didn't just save his life, you've done so much more." Ethan opened the envelope and froze at the sight of a check with an astronomical amount. Shaking his head, he stammered, I can't accept this. I didn't do it for money." Keanu stepped forward, his tone firm but kind. "Ethan, this isn't payment. It's an opportunity. Use it to expand your repair shop, to keep helping people the way you always do. That's who you are, and we want to support you in doing even more." Ethan stood silently for a moment, his heart swelling with emotion. He glanced at the check, then at his hands, worn and calloused from years of hard work. Finally, he nodded. "I'll accept it," he said, his voice steady. "But only if it's used to help my town, too." Mark smiled and shook Ethan's hand. "That's all we could hope for." As Ethan walked out of the hospital, the storm had finally passed. Sunlight broke through the clouds, bathing the snow-covered landscape in a warm glow. He inhaled deeply, feeling a new sense of purpose settle in his chest. This wasn't just a fresh start for him, it was a new beginning for his entire community. A week later, Ethan returned to his humble repair shop. The money Keanu and Mark had given him allowed him to clear his debts and invest in better tools and equipment. But instead of focusing solely on personal gain, Ethan chose to transform his repair shop into a community hub dedicated to helping his townspeople. Ethan launched a free vocational training program aimed at local youth, especially those in need of a fresh start after losing their jobs. "If I can change someone's life the way mine just changed, then I have to," Ethan said on the day the center opened. The training sessions quickly became a source of hope for the community. Ethan didn't just teach people how to repair cars, he showed them the value of kindness and the strength found in perseverance. His inspiring story spread beyond his small town, touching neighboring communities. People who once felt lost began to believe in their own abilities. One day, Kyle, a young trainee who had struggled to find direction, spoke to Ethan. "You didn't just teach me how to fix cars," Kyle said, his voice brimming with gratitude. "You made me believe I could make a difference with my life." Ethan smiled and replied, "Kyle, the most important thing is that you believe in yourself. The rest, I'm just here to guide you." One bright spring morning, as Ethan led a group of trainees, a luxury car pulled up outside the workshop. Keanu and Mark stepped out, their faces glowing with pride. "We couldn't stay away," Keanu said, his eyes filled with admiration. "We had to see what you've done with the opportunity we gave you." They guided Ethan to the trunk, where a large box was waiting. When Ethan opened it, he was speechless. A complete set of cutting-edge repair tools, something he had never dreamed of owning. "We wanted to contribute to your center," Mark said warmly. "You didn't just change Keanu's life. You've uplifted this entire community. This is the least we could do." Ethan was overwhelmed, his emotions too profound for words. He simply nodded and shook Mark's hand, his eyes shimmering with gratitude. A year later, Ethan's center had far exceeded expectations. His trainees had assisted dozens of families in town with car repairs, easing their financial struggles and giving them hope. On a crisp winter afternoon, Ethan stood outside his workshop, watching snowflakes fall softly. Laughter and chatter filled the air as his trainees worked together on a car. Ethan inhaled deeply, feeling a quiet but immense sense of fulfillment. From the window of their modest home, Margaret watched her son, her face glowing with pride. "Ethan," she murmured to herself, "he didn't just save others, he saved himself too." Ethan's journey reminds us all that even the smallest act of kindness can create ripples of extraordinary change. When we live with open hearts, we don't just transform our own lives, we inspire a better world for everyone around us. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Have you ever witnessed an act of kindness or courage like this? Share your story with us in the comments below. Thank you for watching.